Hi, everyone. So this is going to be a really full-length breakdown of the U.S. History Regents Civic Literacy Essay. This is the third part of the U.S. History Regents. It's the third and most important writing component. So this is going to be a pretty thorough video where we break down the task, do some document annotation. I'm going to use Cami for this, but you have to do it on paper. So this way I can get as close to paper as possible. We're going to look at some of the documents that will be on the essay and really try to look at strategies for the questions, ways to brainstorm outside information. We'll look at the rubric. And we're also going to go over the number one question that people always have about the Regents, which is, how can I make my writing more analytical? How can I analyze the documents? How can I incorporate outside information? And then finally, we'll have I'll make a paragraph using one of the example documents. This way, if you happen to miss the U.S. History at Home session, you can still get a lot of this information here. So I'm going to have some tabs on this. I'm going to add this to my YouTube channel. Like or subscribe. And I am going to bookmark different points in this video so that you can pause, you can find what you need. If you're not interested in the guiding questions, but you want to find that analysis, that will be bookmarked with different timestamps on YouTube once I figure out how to do that. But first, let's start by looking at the actual civic literacy essay task. What are we supposed to do on this task? So these are the 3 bullet point instructions that we have from the New York State Regents. And the key here is that I've changed some of the language because in the past, New York has been very vague with their actual expectations of students on this task. And they've changed what they've wanted in the past. So here is the task. And we'll look at these also in the light of the IB command terms, which are useful not just for attacking the Regents exam, but also for applying IB in your classes in U.S. history and otherwise. So these are the 3 tasks. These should basically be your 3 body paragraphs. These should be the main focus of your efforts and your intro. You want to describe the historical circumstances surrounding this constitutional or civic issue. So, right, description is giving a detailed account, not just an account. And it can be of different things. The circumstances could be prior events, what was happening in America before or during this time period. It can be influences, individuals, backstories, the influences of different customs and trends, technology. But one solid paragraph on describing the historical circumstances. And then the Regents is going to ask you to explain 2 efforts, not just one, explain 2 efforts to address this constitutional issue by individuals. So, for example, when we had the Andrew Jackson essay, that was an example of presidential use of power. Presidential use of power is like an enduring issue of U.S. history. Different presidents have did it different ways. So presidential use of power could be such a civic issue. You could have abolitionism. You could have the women's right to vote. You could have many different topics. The topic for our essay that we're going to focus on is Reconstruction. You'll always see where it says historical context. They will always tell you on the Regents exam when you get to the part 3 essay exactly what, I'm going to highlight it, exactly what topic or what issue you are writing about. I'm going to have to try to write this a little bit faster next time. My kid like drawing. But this way you know exactly what issue we are focusing on. And so we're talking about explain 2 efforts to address this issue. Here we're going to look at efforts on Reconstruction, efforts on reconciling and reuniting the country following the Civil War. So explaining the 2 efforts. Again, an explanation is a detailed account, including reasons or causes. It's a little different than just a description because in addition to this detailed account for a description, the explanation has to have the reasons or the causes. So you really want to include in your efforts, you want to identify from the documents what motivated the different individuals, what motivated the government, or what motivated the different groups. The efforts, you need to do 2 or more. I don't recommend doing 3. I recommend you need to do 2. They can be efforts by the same individual. So they can be two actions by the same individual. They can be efforts by different groups or people. They don't need to be successful. They can be attempts or plans even. And then the third bullet point is evaluate the extent to which these two efforts were successful or failures. You notice that the Regents has changed its language in the years past. And what you'll see on your actual essay is discuss the impact. But for our purposes at Harrison High School and trying to get people ready for the Regents and beyond the Regents, we have this as evaluate the impact or evaluate the successes and failures of the efforts. So these are the 3 bullet points. Remember, an evaluation, you really have to choose a criterion or multiple criteria, make judgments based on that criterion. So for the evaluating the impacts, evaluating the successes and failures, you want to really make clear how you're evaluating, what you're evaluating, and then make a judgment call on, for example, was something a long-term success but a short-term failure? Was it successful in both the long-term and short-term? And how does your criterion help you prove your evaluation? So just take a minute here to think about what this means to you, right? Think about how these terms are used in other classes. Think about how these terms are used on the Regents itself. And we're going to break down the rubric here in a second. So, the rubric. New York State will not provide you with the rubric on the actual Regents. We've gone through the rubric before. We'll go over the rubric again. But the actual, moving down here, rubric that is provided for teachers to score your Regents, you won't have on the day of the Regents. You wouldn't want to take that time to do it on the day of the Regents anyway. But you should be familiar with how you're going to be scored. So make sure you know and write down some questions here that you have for us, that you have about your individual essay. That way you know what you should focus on. So let's look at these scoring notes before we get into what's a 5, a 4, a 3, or a 2. You're going to be graded on 4 components. The first component is the historical circumstances, that first bullet point. And then you're going to be scored on explanations of the 2 efforts. So again, the problem in years past that many people have had is they've just gone and explained one effort. They're missing that second effort, and then therefore it's really incomplete, because you want to also then evaluate the extent to which the efforts were successful. So historical circumstances is the first component, effort 1 is the second component, effort 2 is the third component, and then finally evaluating the impact or discussing the successes and failures, that is your 4th. You don't need 4 paragraphs. You don't need 4 body paragraphs for these components, but we'll talk about that with organization. Again, some of this stuff we're going to skip. Many people often wonder, like, do I have to only talk about positive impacts? No, you can do positive or negative efforts, right? You don't need to agree or disagree with the actions or efforts of people in the past. You're just explaining them. And another really important bullet point here is that you can combine your explanation of efforts while you're also looking at the success and failure. So that's how you don't need to have 4 body paragraphs. You could explain an effort while you evaluate its impact. Another big thing here that I always will remind you of multiple times in this video is you can look at immediate or long-term historical circumstances. You can also look for your evaluation at immediate or long-term results. So this really opens up the opportunity for you to apply a unit like Reconstruction to what you know about civil rights today in America, or what you know about the civil rights movement in the 1960s and 70s in America. This really, with the circumstances, allows you to go back and look at analyzing what is the long-term impact of slavery and abolitionism on both the Civil War and Reconstruction. You can discuss events that are outside of the timeline of the documents. This is going to be a great key for outside information. Another key is that they can't mark off points for misspelling, right? The use of language that appears in the document cannot be penalized, and also you're not going to lose tons of points for typos. Make sure you get your information on paper. Don't worry so much, as long as it's legible, about how about your spelling, right? You need to get to it. And of course, for the documents, a major thing is that you need at least 4 documents. The Regents will provide you with 8 documents for your civic literacy essay. You must cite 4 of them. You can do this very briefly in your essay. So really quickly, for the rubric itself, we are not going to break down this entire rubric, but we want to really look at what is the main difference between a 3, a 4, and a 5. How can you raise the bar from hopefully passing the Regents to succeeding and really acing the Regents and your upcoming essay and tests that are going to be in this format? So the real key here, the difference between the 3 and 4 and 5 is that first, a 3 talks about little depth or not a lot of detail. A 3, you maybe omitted one of the efforts, or you never got to your evaluation of the impact. You only have 3 of those 4 components. But you're going to see that if you go into a 4, you should have, to get a 4, all of the aspects done. And to get a 5, you want to have all of those aspects done evenly. So time management is a real important issue for the Regents essay. We'll practice for that as well. The main thing is, yes, you want to be detailed. You want to make sure that you address all of the bullet points. And you need to be analytical. This is a long story, so I'll try to keep it short. When they gave the first Regents essay, and they gave us example papers last June 2023, the only difference between some 3, 4s, and 5s was this bullet point of how analytical or descriptive the writing is. And that's why we're going to have a whole portion of this video focused on breaking down descriptive or analytical and so on. You're going to notice that you can even get a 2 for doing all the things in the world, but basically just regurgitating information, basically just rewriting the documents, or just describing what you've seen, right? The main key is you want to be more analytical than descriptive. For a 5, it needs to be more analysis than description. A 4, it can be sort of a mix between description and analysis. But you'll only get a 3 or even a 2 if you are mostly describing the documents. So the key here is to take and yes, I know this is confusing. Isn't the Regents asking us to describe the historical circumstances? Yeah, that's what they say. And then they're going to grade your description off of how analytical it is? Yes, you better believe it. So even though the bullet points don't all say analysis, you want to try to weave your analysis into all 3 elements throughout your writing. You want to be on that big brain level anyway, which is really the level of evaluating and analysis, not just describing or citing. So the last thing about the rubric, where did it go? The last thing about the rubric is this outside information piece. You should, in addition to incorporating information from 4 documents, also include some outside information. And we'll talk about this in a minute when we look at document annotation, but you should not just base your writing off the Regents provided documents. You really need to incorporate outside information to get even like a 5 or a 4, or even to get down to a 2, right? Like a 2 is little or no relevant outside information. So there's going to be a short part where we talk about brainstorming outside information. You need to be able to connect your analysis not just to what's in the documents in front of you, but to other things that have happened in history or the present day. So take a minute here to think about what questions you have about the rubric. What do you think your keys to success would be? Which of these bullet points do you think are the most difficult for you or have been the most difficult for you so far? It's important to know your strengths and weaknesses in order to have the best strategy for anything in life, but especially for an exam where time is a thing. So let's move along here. If you have questions, you should drop the questions to your teachers. You could also contact me directly. If you're watching this on YouTube, you can put it in the YouTube comments. But we're going to move on next to your priorities. Because like I sort of just mentioned, the key with this essay is you have a lot of stuff to do, and this is part 3 of a full-length test already. So what do you prioritize? What do you really focus on? Is it examining all the documents in detail? Is it making a long descriptive answer to each of these document-based questions? No and no. Your emphasis, your priority should be on addressing these main bullet points. This is what you're going to be mostly graded on. Do not waste your time on the intro. We didn't even look at in the rubric how many points you get for an intro and a conclusion. It is not critical to the U.S. History Regents essay. It is not a good use of your time to prioritize a long, detailed intro or to agonize over a conclusion when you have many other things to do in these bullet points. So your priorities really should be making sure you describe the historical circumstances, explain 2 of the efforts, and then evaluate the impact, evaluate the successes and failures of both of those efforts. That's your priority. It's this, okay? It's this part. It's not anything else outside of that scope there. So think about this again, right? Make sure that you have the priorities straight. Think about the last time that you did this essay, or if you're watching this after the Regents, think about what you did on your Regents. How can you prioritize, or what should you prioritize, and what sort of gets in your way? You should know this for yourself. And I want to make a quick point about some of the resources that we've provided at the Harrison High School. So these are things that you won't have on the day of the Regents. You will not have this long, beautifully detailed command terms charts. You won't have these breakdown, which will go into a minute, of the document questions or annotations, or the general tips, or the organizers that Mrs. Heath and Mrs. Mahecha have made for us. You need to internalize these processes, okay? So as I quickly go through these, there's going to be a few keys, which is like, which of these resources are useful for me? You should ask yourself. And how do I internalize and understand what to do without these in front of me on the day of the actual Regents? I repeat, you're not going to be handed Mr. Johnson's sentence starters on the day of the Regents. You gotta have to memorize them. When I was in the Bronx, I had people memorize these things before the test. I was like, listen, you haven't been coming to class, you haven't been working all year. You can still pass the Regents, but you need to have some supports that you have internalized that you can make happen on the day of the test. And it could be the sentence starters or the outlines or so on. So here are the resources that we've tried to provide. In addition to the sentence starters, right? These are great tools that you can use on your essay. These are things that for the Reconstruction essay, we will pass out in class, but we're not going to have them on the Regents or on future tests. These can really help you put into words what you are thinking for the efforts or the successes and failures, or even your conclusion. You also have this big long PowerPoint here, right? How to attack the document questions. What are some ideas for the intro, the circumstances paragraph, for the efforts or the successes and failures and the impacts, right? If you're sort of like less of an outline person like me, this is probably what you want to internalize, are these suggestions. But you also might really want to internalize the outline itself, because even though we're going to give this to you for the essay. Oh, and I wanted to clarify, for anyone who is at home right now, you'll notice that we did not give you the outline at home. We do not want people writing their essay at home. We do not want people getting used to taking a test in a non-testing environment. So all you have at home is the documents themselves. So you should annotate those in a few minutes alongside me and then on your own. But you should think about the outline too, because While we do not want people writing their whole essay in this outline at home and then bringing it in and just copying it from one paper to the other, we will not accept that. You have to be able to do the writing in class because you'll have to take the test in school. Think about these outlines and which one behooves you the best, right? So let's take a minute, just think. You can pause the video. Anytime I say, like, let's take a minute, we're going to move on. This is an opportunity to pause the video. You can always come back here with the bookmarks later. But really think about which of these tools is most useful for you. Which ones do you need to review before you write the essay in class this week, or before the Regents on the actual day of the Regents. Make sure you sort of have that internalized. So let's do some document annotation, because the real key here is this, okay, for the documents. Let's find the slide. There are 3 things that are on your mind when you're looking at these documents, and you should pull out the documents now if you're at home watching this video, because as you look through these documents, you might think answering this question is the most important thing for me. It is not. Using the document to write your essay is the most important thing. You might sit here thinking going through each document and annotating every single one of them is the most important thing. But you only need to use 4 documents in your essay. So what is important when it comes to the document? Well, the most important priority is annotating the documents while you go through them so that you can use 4 of them on your essay. You don't need all 8. So you want to annotate the documents, and you want to really ask yourselves, can I use this for the circumstances? Can I use this for the efforts? Or maybe this is another effort I can use for my second effort. Is this a successful impact? Is this a failure or creating a negative impact on the country? You really want to focus on this while you are reading the essay. And that's why in a second, we're going to go through the annotation for this. Then, and we'll have a section on this in a minute, the second most important thing is not answering the question, but brainstorming ideas for outside information. Even if you don't use a document in your essay, if you come up with outside information, something related to Reconstruction, something related to the topic, that is something that you want to jot down really quickly, because that is going to be outside information that goes into your essay to make it more descriptive, to make it even from descriptive to analytical. So you want to brainstorm outside information, and you want to answer those document questions really briefly. I mean, super briefly. And we'll go over that here in a minute after we really look at the document annotation. So what we're going to do is we're going to look at through the document annotation here. And the key is, in addition to the circumstances, efforts, I don't like using impacts. It's very vague. So I'd like either talking about success or failure. The C, the E, the S, the F. These are the only things that you really need on your essay in order to pass the Regents. I can tell you from last year, these are like the core 4 that I was using with students last year, and this is what most of the students used. Yes, we'll go over some more advanced annotation here, but we really want to see how can you use this annotation for circumstances, efforts, successes, and failures. So we're going to annotate a document together. But it's not a document I have in front of me, you're saying there. Yeah, no kidding, because this is a test. So what I'm doing here is I'm providing an exemplar to you so that you can see how to do this. And then you're going to have to do this on some of the documents yourself. So this document 0, which is from the African American Council Public Statement from 1898, this is not a document that you're using for your essay. This is not a document that you'll get points on for using in your essay. So just take a minute to see how this annotation works, and then you should stop and apply it to your own documents, okay? So I'm going to read this out loud while I sort of like metacognitively think aloud about how I could use the circumstance, effort, and success and failure. And I apologize because it's a little slow, but right, like you're doing this on paper because you can't type it up. It's a test. And so I'm trying to do it. If I had a touch screen, this would be a lot easier. So first of all, looking at the document, you should look at the source first. Always start with the source first, because you're going to really understand, is this a document that I can use for the beginning, middle or end of my document, by looking at the source. And like I just said, this is African American Council public statement from 1898. So this is later than Reconstruction. This is a secondary source that comes from after Reconstruction is over. So right away, in my mind, I'm thinking about how this is primarily going to be related to the impact. I'm immediately just looking from the source before I even look at the document itself, thinking about, okay, if this is written about events and things after Reconstruction is over, then I'm really looking for, can I use this in my circumstances? Can I use this in my impact paragraph? So here we go. Since 1868, there has been a steady and persistent determination to eliminate us from the politics of the southern states. Okay, let's unpack this really quickly. So 1868, there's been a steady and persistent determination to eliminate us from the politics. Who is us? Well, this is probably a group of African Americans in the southern states, in the South. It's the source is the African American Council. So you're really looking for us, or you're really understanding that us is the perspective. This document is written from the perspective of African Americans at the end of Reconstruction or late in Reconstruction. And in fact, if I'm looking over here, I'm thinking that this first sentence is a really good example of either circumstances or of efforts. Because where this document says there's been a steady and persistent determination to eliminate us from the politics, that's an effort by, I assume, I'm just going to go with it, racists and other groups to marginalize people based on the color of their skin, right? So this racist effort, if you were going to write an effort paragraph on the Ku Klux Klan, or you see another document about Jim Crow segregation or black codes, this could go in your effort paragraph to describe it was a steady effort to eliminate African Americans from politics. On the other hand, if I was writing a paragraph about the circumstances of Reconstruction, I would possibly just use this for the circumstance sentence, for the circumstance paragraph instead. So one thing you're going to really see is that you could use any of these documents for circumstances or for efforts, or for different people's efforts, or as an example of impact, of success and failure. You don't want to use the same document 4 times. You need to use 4 different documents. But you have options. And one real powerful tool of annotation with the CESF is I could use this document by the time I'm done with it for any of my paragraphs. I only did 1 sentence, and I saw that I could use this for circumstances, or I could use this for efforts. So let's see. We are not to be eliminated. Suffrage is a federal guarantee and not a privilege to be conferred or withheld by the states. Okay, so again, the topic is about voting, right? Suffrage is the right to vote. And again, I can really sort of determine that the circumstance here is that since 1868, many African Americans have faced efforts to eliminate their right to vote in the South. So again, I'd probably put this up here with C. We contend for the principle of manhood suffrage as the most effective safeguard of citizenship. Man, if I was talking about African American efforts, I would be writing about this one here, right? It's definitely an effort. They want to be able to vote. And it says, right, a disenfranchised citizen is a pariah in the body politic, right? So this is like the motivation. If I was describing why do African Americans feel like they need to vote? Why does anybody need to feel the need to vote? It's because if you don't vote, you are not represented in your country. And if you cannot vote, you won't be represented in your country. So this is especially to me is like an effort of African Americans. Let's see if I can do this. Very small in the Chromebook. And then it goes on. We are not opposed to legitimate restriction of the suffrage, but we insist that restrictions shall apply alike to all citizens of all states. We are willing to accept an educational or property qualification, or both, and we contend that retroactive legislation depriving. Okay, so as I'm reading this, I'm not getting much here. Yes, like, to be honest, I understand what this person is saying, but I don't really think it fits with this effort. Sort of like a concession or counterpoint. And so I'm just sort of glossing over this. I don't need to use this whole document. I already have plenty for effort or circumstance. Let's see what they keep saying, though. We are willing to accept an educational or property qualification or both, and we contend that retroactive legislation depriving citizens of the suffrage rights is a hardship which should be speedily passed upon by the courts. Okay, they're really asking here for the courts to make a ruling on these restrictions on voting. But then we insist that neither of these was intended or is conserved by the new constitutions of Mississippi, South Carolina, or Louisiana. Again, this is probably efforts of, these are racist efforts by the states to limit the right to vote of racial minorities in them, right? Their framers intended and did disenfranchise a majority of their citizenship because of race and color. Yeah, this is what I thought it was, right? And this is where you can bring in outside information. We'll talk about this later. I'm seeing that, like, this effort in the second part of the paragraph is really how are they taking away the right to vote? They're taking away the right to vote based using educational qualifications. They're taking the right to vote away using property qualifications. Even though for a minute I was thinking that this effort, this paragraph would be great, this document would be great in a paragraph about the efforts of African Americans, I'm also seeing that if I was writing a paragraph about the efforts of racist actors in Reconstruction, this would also be a really useful paragraph. And so then it goes on to say, we therefore, again, African Americans, therefore call upon the Congress to reduce the representation of those states in the Congress as provided and made mandatory by Section 2 of Article 14 of the Constitution. They are getting technical here. We're not going to get into that. And furthermore, we call upon African Americans everywhere to resist by all lawful means the determination to deprive them of their suffrage rights. Number one, I fully agree with this. And this is another example of, like, what is an effort. You would definitely be able to use a paragraph, and I probably will use this paragraph, because at the end of this video, I'm going to write a paragraph up using this document here. And so far, I'm really saying, like, not just motivations about efforts, either by racist actors or by African Americans in the South, but I'm seeing some really specific examples about their efforts. What efforts are they asking for, or what efforts will many people likely use to fight for the right to vote? It is necessary to accomplish this vital purpose, to divide their vote in a given state. We advise that they divide it. Oh man, yes. The shibboleth of party must give way to the shibboleth of self-preservation. The word shibboleth in a historical document. There we are, folks. So again, one thing that I was looking for in this document is, can I use this document for success and failure? Well, yes, I can, because in addition to finding some circumstances that African Americans found themselves in the South during Reconstruction, and the efforts by racist actors, the efforts of African Americans to fight for their right to vote, I've also seen that there must have been a huge failure of Reconstruction, right? Because if this entire document is talking about African Americans are not given the right to vote, or are not enjoying the right to vote, even though they should have it in these states, there must have been a failure of Reconstruction somewhere along the way. So even though I probably won't use this document for the impact, I certainly could. So really quickly, this is the main name of the game. It's really breaking down circumstances, efforts, successes, and failures. So what I think, what I would advise people to do right now is, if you're following along at home, I would pause the video. I would go through your Regents documents and read them and annotate them. Don't even worry about the document questions yet, but mark down C for circumstance, E for effort, S for success, and F for failure. It's fine if you have just one annotation per document. It's also fine if you don't have annotations on all of them. You only need 4. But when we start our essay in class, you should be prepared to come in with your documents annotated so that you can write about their circumstances, efforts, and successful and failed impacts. So take a minute, pause the video right here. We're going to break down some more advanced annotations in a moment. Okay, so what do I mean by more advanced annotations? Well, besides the basic C, E, S, and F to annotate circumstances, efforts, successes, and failures, these are some tools that students have found useful in the past. Again, you don't need this in your document, but it will help you be more analytical. It could help you know what to write. So what do I mean? Well, let me first see if I can erase some of this here. Did it not work? Nope. All annotations. Okay. So what I mean by advanced annotations is, in addition to the circumstances and efforts, successes and failures, there's other keys that you can use, and here are what they look like. So let me do some drawing here. We'll keep using, and we'll switch it up. We'll go purple. For example, in addition to circumstances, students I've seen in the past have used C+ for positive circumstances and C- for negative circumstances. This is a really quick, easy annotation. This is my annotation style. I don't like writing long margin notes, but I immediately have more analytical notes that I can use in my essay by determining these circumstances were good for whom, helpful for whose efforts, or counterproductive to whose efforts. This helps me immensely. And what I saw in this document was, since 1868, there has been a steady and persistent determination to eliminate African Americans, us, from the politics of the southern states. This, to me, if I was using the circumstance paragraph, is an example of negative circumstances for anybody who believes in equality, and especially for African Americans or other minorities in the United States in general, not just the southern states. So I could use this in my paragraph about the circumstances, right? I just know by having the C+ or the C-, the circumstances were beneficial for one effort or negative for one effort. Another thing, and I did this here a little bit as well already, is I like to number my efforts, because if I don't know which effort I'm going to talk about, I don't just want a whole bunch of E's all around my paper. I might want to think about either labeling the efforts or at least putting effort 1 or effort 2 or effort 3, right? Again, you don't need, and I don't recommend doing more than 2 efforts. You only need to explain 2 efforts and evaluate them. But as you're taking notes, you might come across 3, 4, 5 or more efforts. You might just want to number them. But if you were writing this on paper, I would recommend doing what I did, which is like putting a note next to each one. So for example, we saw down here that African Americans are contending for manhood suffrage. They are asking the courts to rule on state restrictions. They are also calling upon people of color to resist limitations on their right to vote. And I would probably annotate this personally like E. And then I used this note before, efforts of African Americans during Reconstruction, right? This is a big group. You could also easily imagine efforts of governments, efforts of Abraham Lincoln. When we go through, and especially if you want to apply this here in a minute, I really would recommend it. If you start having a sense of whose efforts you're going to write about, you want to be able to pull that out of your document very quickly. On the other hand, to return to this document 0, we had also the efforts of racist groups and governments in the South. Let me see if I can actually be more specific here. Educational or property qualifications to vote. Actions by these states to disenfranchise a majority of their citizens because of race and color. Yeah, this is what I would point to as I would want it, and I'm the teacher. I should know how to phrase this so perfectly. I would definitely phrase this in my mind and then try to think of this as a different way, as these are like racist efforts to restrict the right to vote. These are either efforts by, looks like political actors in the states. And so I would have this as like another effort. You could just have used effort 1, effort 2, but here is another one. The other annotation that I recommend, or that students have sometimes used in the past, I'm just going to put this down at the bottom because I'm running out of time, is a long-term success, right? Success for S, and the L should sort of show you that it's like a long-term success. Similarly, I've seen students write before in the past that there was something that was like a short-term failure. These are shorthands that students sometimes will like write out. I've seen this more in margin notes, but to like specify a success that was long-term or a failure that was short-term. And the other notes that I've seen in the past is this. I've seen students use next to a document success with a little bitty failure, right? Like most of this document is a success and there's a little bit of failure in there. Or on the other hand, most of this document contains a failure, but there's also like a little bit of success in here. If I was labeling this document and I was going to use it for my impact paragraph, I'd probably label this document on the whole as failures of Reconstruction, or at least failed efforts to enfranchise minority voters. And I don't even know if I see too many successes in here, to be honest, in this actual document. I like the efforts, but I don't know if I see successes evidenced in here. But generally, so I would probably use, if I was using this paragraph, I would use it to describe the circumstances or explain the efforts. So I'm going to pause right here. You should pause right here. You should review at least 4 of your documents, because if you've been following the instructions and you annotated the circumstances, efforts, successes, and failures of your Regents documents, maybe you should go through, look at least 2 or 3 and apply some more advanced annotation. Are there positive circumstances, negative circumstances, short-term efforts, long-term efforts, and so on. And then we'll resume here in a moment. Okay, so what about these questions? Well, these guiding questions, the Regents actually writes down that these are like scaffolding questions. And while these are like this is like a 1-point question, you should answer all 6 of them. Even if you're not going to use the document, you should really briefly answer all 6. These are in a way useful, but also limiting questions, because, for example, one that we'll look at really quickly right here is this document. This is a document that you have on your Reconstruction essay. And so, although we're not going to break it down in full right now, you can follow along at home too. So, looking at this document and answering the question, I would want to annotate this document first. Since I am going to the source first, I'm looking at, this is a document about who controlled Congress in 1865, the beginning of Reconstruction, until 1867. I'm immediately thinking in my mind that this is about the circumstances. I'm immediately thinking this document is based on circumstances. And lo and behold, the Regents question is, according to the document, what is one historical circumstance of Reconstruction? Okay, but could I possibly use this document to describe efforts or successes and failures? Absolutely. And I sort of just want to show you really briefly how that's possible. So, for example, yes, the Regents document is at the beginning. I would probably use it for circumstances. And before we identify one of the historical circumstances, I would also want to point out that there are efforts here too. Because, for example, when you look at these vacant seats on the side of the Senate graph and on the side of the House of Representatives graph, you're really showing a major loss of representation for the Confederacy. What you're seeing here with these vacant seats are, and I'm going to even mark this as like it's an effort of the Confederacy, right? Like this document is showing that at the beginning of Reconstruction, the Confederate government and the former Confederate states are not represented in Congress. Yes, that could be a circumstance, but you could also sort of write about how there was this effort to exclude, rightfully so, in my opinion, but an effort to exclude these former Confederate senators and representatives from Congress, right? Especially if we're looking at this and we're saying like, okay, 1867, the war is over, but the Congress people from the former Confederate states haven't been reinstated yet. That's an effort to exclude the Confederacy from Congress. I would also probably, I don't think I would actually use this in an efforts paragraph, but I could also, if this was an essay on the Civil War, I would probably mark this as like a failure of the Confederacy too, right? So one thing, and this is not the best document for it, but I do just want to show everybody that these guiding questions, they will say like, what's one historical circumstance? You don't need to use this document in your essay for circumstances. You need to answer the question for circumstances. This one here is, what's another historical circumstance? But you could think about efforts while you're reading this. This one is about an effort, but does it have information about circumstances? Absolutely. And you could even look at this document here, not just looking at efforts, but looking at what were some of the successes, what were some of the amendments that were created during Reconstruction. So I want to just really point out quickly, do not only think that each document can be used for the circumstance or effort or success or failure according to the document below. Like, you want to answer what is one impact based off this question, but you do not want to only think about impact when you're annotating this document. So in a lot of ways, there are very big limitations to these questions. So how do you answer a question like this? Well, you keep it simple, okay? You want to write a short, complete sentence. You don't want to, I want a text box here, please. You want to be able to have, let's put it here, a really short and simple answer. So according to the document, what is one historical circumstance of Reconstruction? Well, if just looking at the chart, the Republican Party dominated both parties of Congress. So I would put this here. One circumstance was Republican Party control of Congress during Reconstruction. There's multiple correct answers here that you could use, okay? And if you're watching this video, yes, this is one of them. But you want to keep these short. You do not need to write 3 or 4 sentences. You shouldn't be vague either, though. You shouldn't just write something like Congress. That will not get you the point. You shouldn't just write something like Republicans. Like, that will not get you the point, right? Also, just being vague is not a good idea either. So if you write down something like, they controlled Congress, okay? Let's think about this for a second here. They controlled Congress. Who controlled Congress, right? Personally, if I was grading this and someone wrote, they controlled Congress, I wouldn't give them the point. You could write this and get the point, right? Don't answer these questions so lazily that you miss the point. Answer them quickly, and then you should be able to get your point. But more importantly, annotate the document so you can use it later. I would probably use this one for circumstances, just saying. So take a minute. What I would recommend doing at this point in time is going through your documents, briefly answering in a sentence or two each of these questions. You're going to want to answer these on the Regents to get these 6 points, but I would take a little bit of time to pause the video now and answer these 6. Okay, so hopefully you did that. Next, we're going to look at outside information, because to go back to our rubric, the Regents wants you to incorporate, and I'm going to pick a new color here. They want you to incorporate, I'll go with blue, outside information, right? They're going to actually grade you off of, do you have relevant outside information? Is it substantial? Is it limited? Or do you have no outside information or just a little outside information? So while you're going through these documents, one major key is, yes, in addition to annotating the documents to use them in your essay, you want to brainstorm ideas for outside information. And, what kind of outside information can you use? Well, here's the one that I recommend 100% of the time. It's the Constitution. It's the Constitution. It's always been the Constitution. The essay itself was really set up for different topics based on constitutional and civic issues. It says right there, the Constitution. So if you're thinking, what information can I use in my essay? I will bet the farm, don't care what the spread is, you could use the Constitution as outside information. You could bring that into any topic in U.S. history and use your knowledge of the Constitution that's not presented in the different documents as outside information. And that's why one thing that I will always stress at the beginning of every year, throughout the whole year, is if you know the Constitution and you know how the government works, you will understand history and you will understand what's going on in America much better. So I'm going to recommend, and we'll do this really quickly here, with document 1. I could do this with document 0, but I want to just do this with document 1 to give people who have watched this video or attending the U.S. History at Home session like a little bit more insight onto how to do this. So, for example, party control of Congress, right? Congress makes laws, okay? Right? I don't recommend writing long notes on your outside information, but Congress makes laws, and they also amend the Constitution, right? They propose amendments to the Constitution. So if I just look at this document and I'm thinking, okay, great, the Republicans controlled Congress in 1865 to 1867. Yes, that's true, but I can't write much with it. But what I can, by using outside information, is I can determine that this Republican control of Congress helps them write laws that they want. It also allows them to propose amendments to the Constitution without involving any other political group. And I believe, I know, that they can also override vetoes with this kind of congressional representation. So right away, if I was writing this circumstance paragraph using document 1, I have a whole host of outside information about why these circumstances are beneficial to the Republicans. I'm not just writing a document saying the Republicans controlled Congress according to document 1. Then I'm going to add in outside information. This allowed the Republican Party at the time to create laws, amend the Constitution. That's what we're really talking about for outside information. What else could you do for outside information here? Well, since this is Congress, you want to think about the Senate and the House of Representatives. How would you know which one's which? Well, the Senate has always a smaller amount of members, so this one here must be the Senate, and this one must be the House of Representatives. If you remember, the House has control of the purse. The House has control of laws pertaining to taxes and budgets. So if I was thinking about a specific piece of outside information I could bring in here, I could discuss in my circumstances paragraph using document 1. This advantage in the House of Representatives means that any budget or spending bill that the Republican Party wants, they can pass because they control the House. Here's another one. I can tell you exactly how many Confederate states are omitted from Congress, because if there are 22 states missing, I can use my outside information to tell you that, if there's 22 senators missing, every state gets 2 senators. Every state gets exactly 2 senators. You're going to want to know this information. It's part of the reason the Civil War occurred. It goes back to the Great Compromise in the critical period after the Revolutionary War. It is a major factor in the pre-Civil War era. It is a major battleground of politics throughout American history until today. Every state gets 2 senators. So which party will control the Senate? It's going to be about placing your people equally around the country. If you just control California, you'll get a lot of representatives, but you won't have more than 2 senators. So I can tell you from this document, There must have been 11 Confederate states that were in rebellion at the beginning of this Congress because there are 22 vacant seats. So there must be at least 11 states that were in the Confederacy. And there were. Look at that. So again, outside information, it's really important. And what I'm going to ask you to do here in a moment is to review these documents and just really quickly jot down outside information. Other examples of outside information besides the Constitution are names. If you can remember who Frederick Douglass was or who he hung out with, that is great. Well, especially who he hung out with. That's great outside information to bring in if you use document 2A. If you have some outside information on prior events, what was going on in the South before 1871 and before these events in this document, the prior events is great outside information, right? Virginia, Kentucky resolution, maybe anyone? These are all just examples. So outside information can be about the Constitution, constitutional principles, the way the government works, also names, prior events, future events. If you are looking at some of these documents and you're thinking about Rosa Parks and Martin Luther King Jr., and you do not use those people in your essay, shame on you. You're wasting your brain power. You should use future events as outside information. If you're looking at a picture, if you're reading a document, and you make a connection to a future event, a future person, that is where you should go. And finally, another piece of outside information that you can use are opponents or counters. So to go back to this document 1 here, if I am associating the Republican Party with Lincoln, that's outside information. But if I'm also associating the vacant seats with the Confederacy, that is another piece of outside information that I could use here, because I'm not just identifying the main actor or writer or individual for an effort. I'm also thinking about opponents and counters, right? So if I was reading document 2A and I was thinking about other abolitionists, great, that's outside information I could use. I could also think about opponents of abolition and counters or efforts against abolition from before in history. And I could use that as outside information too. So take a minute. We're going to get into types of analysis in a moment, but go through your documents, think about what outside information you need to bring in. You don't need outside information for every single document. You don't need more outside information than analysis. But the more outside information you have, the easier it is to be detailed, the easier it is to analyze, I would argue. And actually, we'll use that in a minute. So let's get to it. Okay, I need a Dr. Pepper here. So the number one thing students often ask about the civic literacy essay is, how can I make my writing more analytical? How can I analyze and not just describe? Well, there are many ways to analyze, and I wanted to go through a couple of them really briefly here. The first one, or the first type of analysis, is analysis with outside information. There's a reason the Regents says, can you use outside information and make it substantial and relevant to get a 5? It's because analyzing through outside information is a real key. So we've actually already laid the groundwork for this with some of our annotations here. If I have outside information about how the Constitution works, and I can tell you that this party control of Congress in the beginning of Reconstruction helps or allows the Republican Party to make laws and amend the Constitution at the beginning of Reconstruction, that is incredible analysis that I can use in other documents, I might add, and also here as well, right? I wouldn't just say the Republicans dominated Congress. They can make laws. They can make amendments. I would want to also provide analysis by coming up with examples of laws, right? Like if you have an example of outside information of types of laws that the Republican Congress can make, or amendments that they could pass, or topics of amendments, now you're able to extend your outside information. You're able to explain why the circumstance, for example, would be so beneficial of party dominance in Congress. So one type of analysis is analyzing using outside information. It's a real key. You can think about it, or you can even try to apply that right now. Another type of analysis is analyzing the document itself in detail. If we actually look at, where is it? I have to find my command terms chart. If we look at the, I will have to find it for another time. If we look at a document, or specifically, let me look at this map here, you could really analyze the document itself in detail by breaking down the components of the map. So, for example, using this document 5, I could probably break down this map in detail and analyze it. I would not just describe it and say, document 5 shows a before and after map of a plantation and then a property. You won't get more than like a trickle of points on this. But how can you analyze in greater detail? Let's see if I can zoom in here. Well, if I could zoom in here a little bit more, and this is okay, I could tell you that one key, and again, are you doing this for circumstances? Are you doing this for efforts? Are you doing this for successes or failures? It's going to depend. But I can probably find one of each here. Circumstances of the enslaved at the beginning of the Civil War, at the end of the Civil War. The enslaved were kept on tight, packed quarters on the plantation lands, right? They were forced to live together. They are all living very close to one another. And then circumstances after, you have these names of individuals, and you can tell the circumstances on, for example, this Georgia plantation is that the formerly enslaved, because they're not slaves anymore, the circumstances of the formerly enslaved are that they live in individual homes or individual properties on different parts of the property, and they're much more spread out, right? So again, that's one example of like, I'm just breaking down one part of this document. I could also break down a few other things, and I'm just only using this one document. The owner didn't change. The Barrows owned this plantation in 1860. The Barrows own all of this land in 1880. That tells me that, for example, Sabrina Dalton is renting this property. She's a tenant on this property. Is she a former slave? I don't know. But with all these names down here, I would reckon a few of these individuals are formerly enslaved by the Barrows. Right? That's, again, like using inference as a type of analysis, especially when you're analyzing a document in detail. Inference is a major skill here as well. Another example. Well, I don't see any schools or churches on this property in the 1860s. So maybe if I was talking about some of the successes of Reconstruction, I would talk about the fact that churches and schools were established on former plantations in places like, for example, document 5, the Barrow plantation in Georgia, right? Oh, look, it even says houses of tenant farmers who were former slaves of the Barrow family, right? Like, again, I probably have a whole paragraph here on either the circumstances or or efforts, or successes and failures, just using this one document. And I can tell you, yes, I'm a map dork, but I could use this document 5 for any of the 3 major components: circumstances, efforts, successes, and failures. And I can be very analytical just by describing the document in detail. I didn't need to use any outside information here. I could just use the document in detail. So that's one other type of analysis. So take a minute to compare some of the analysis that you've been making, or even compare what analysis you made on this one map with what we just did. Finally, the last type of analysis that we're going to talk about today is connecting documents, not just stating document 6A says this, document 6B shows this. How are they connected? You can do this in many different ways. So this is going to be a lot. I wrote these all down. You could connect a document's circumstances to a future effort. If you find a document on the amendments later on, you would do well to tie in the circumstances that brought about those efforts. You could connect one document's circumstances to another document's impact. I'll show you an example in a second. You could connect efforts to another effort. You can have different efforts and show in the same document or in other documents how they compared and contrast. That can be a type of analysis as well. You can also obviously talk about you can connect documents based off of impact short term versus impact long term. You can connect documents showing here's a success, here's a failure, here's a negative impact, and here's a positive impact. So another key for analysis that I'll show you an example of here in a moment is connecting documents. So connecting documents, we're going to try to connect document 1 to this example document 0, which again you don't have, but it's a good example. Since 1868, there's been a steady and persistent determination to eliminate us from politics. Wow, 1868. If I had document 1 and I was looking at that source again, it showed me that this Republican control of Congress lasted until March of 1867. So there is going to be a connection that I could make here between while the Republicans dominated politics in Washington, D.C., there were fewer efforts, or at least according to document 0, less determination to eliminate African Americans from politics. What else can I do here? Well, I could talk about, for example, the right to vote, and that if the authors of document 0 are calling upon Congress to punish these states, or they're calling on the courts to eliminate these restrictions based off of race and color, then I could also connect this with document 1, going out on a limb and assuming that over time these vacant seats did not all go to the Republican Party, right? Many of these vacant seats are going to be filled later on, post 1868, according to document 0, and that therefore this Republican majority in Congress is going to weaken. I would be able to make this analytical inference. I'm just inferring here. Like I am not talking as a U.S. history teacher who knows that this happens. I'm just using these documents to show you that, according to document 0, there was a bigger effort nationwide, especially in the South, to limit African American voters, and that this probably coincides with this reduction in Republican majority, right? That's just inference, for example. So how can you connect documents? You should maybe at least ID 2 documents that you can connect together right now. Take a minute to go through your notes. You should know by now which 4 documents you are going to use, or you should at least have an idea of 2 or 3 of the documents that you are going to use. How could you connect 2 of those documents? How could you show that the circumstances in one affects the efforts in another? Or how can you show that the efforts in one document result in an impact in another? Okay. Take a minute. The last thing we're going to do here is an example paragraph. So let me see here. All right. So Hugo's crying, so I'm going to try to wrap this up pretty quickly here. The very last thing I wanted to do is an example paragraph. And what I'm going to do for this example paragraph is give a quick writing using document 0. I'm going to use this document as the purpose. And I'm going to start with an example that frankly is not great. Okay, here we go. So going back to my notes, I analyzed that I could use this document 0 for the circumstances. So I'm going to write a circumstance paragraph, and I'm going to put it right here. Okay. So here it goes, right? Let me see. Let's see. There were negative circumstances during Reconstruction. Document 0 states, go back and see, since 1868, there has been a steady and persistent determination. a steady effort to limit African American voters in the South since 1868. I want to show really clearly which document I am using here. Okay, let's see, what else can I do? These are negative circumstances that meant African Americans, I don't care about spelling, I'll come back for that later, were not granted the right to vote in several states. This was a problem. Let me see. What else is something I could use here? Oh, right, that they based their efforts on. Ooh, how the circumstance motivated the efforts. Oh, is that analytical? This was a problem that motivated groups, especially African Americans, to organize to protect their rights to vote. Okay, how is that? That's probably a 2 or a 3, right? Like, I know you're sitting there being like, what? This is supposed to be the example. But right, this was a super descriptive example so far. Basically, I was just trying to use this document to get some ideas down about the negative circumstances. It might be a 3 because we're specifying the circumstances are negative. It might be a 3 because we use a document and we really explain. This sentence is analytical, right? Showing that this was a problem that motivated groups to protect their right to vote. This is a more analytical sentence. The rest, though, is quite descriptive. So let's see if we can spice it up more, right? Let's see if I can utilize my notes better. There were negative circumstances during Reconstruction. I want to keep this document here. Oh, you know what, though? I'm going to say I want to talk about when Reconstruction was. From what I've gathered so far, Reconstruction was at least from 1865 until 1868. Do I need to get the date right? No, I don't. But I can put this here as well, right? And in fact, I think I've just sort of gained some outside information. Reconstruction began at the end of the Civil War in 1865. Great. I bet I could also write about what Reconstruction was, right? This was an effort to bring the country back together following the Civil War, and to amend and change the way of life, especially in the South. I'm using some outside information here, but again, outside information is very analytical. One group that was negatively impacted by circumstances in the South, it said in the South, were African Americans. Okay, I like my document quote here. I like that it shows that they weren't granted the right to vote in several states. There's a problem. I'm going to try to continue this really briefly here, but I have to wrap this up. Without the right to vote, any group would face adversity in being represented in a democratic republic like America. So it's important to understand that this right to vote didn't only mean small, I don't want to use the term negative again, a small disadvantage for, don't care about the spelling, I'll fix that later, for African Americans. Let me see if I can even, what I want to be able to do is to analyze this instead, right? Especially what I'll say here is this. It said, depriving citizens of the suffrage rights is a hardship which should be speedily passed upon to the courts. No, that's not the one I thought. Oh, a disenfranchised citizen is a pariah in the body politic. Well, I could get pretty political here, but that's not my job. My job is to give you a good example. But I would say that, like, as the document states, not having The right to vote means a group is an outcast in their own nation. And I'm going to use some outside information here. Since African Americans had already faced generations of racism, slavery, and political disenfranchisement, suffrage being denied to them during Reconstruction must have generated both great fear and anxiety about their future in the United States. I'm even going to use a question, right? If your English teacher was here, would he or she say, like, how about using a question? Who would want to live in a country where they couldn't vote? How about this? Who would want to permanently live, not a vacation, in a country where they couldn't vote? So we can see from this document that the right, let me change this around to that suffrage being denied to Black citizens during Reconstruction was a major negative circumstance, one that would inspire efforts such as, see what I'm doing here? I'm going to try to wrap up my paragraph. To be honest, I don't like what I've written here. I think that this is sort of too limited. I tried to make this one great paragraph using just information from one document, but I have so much information that I could draw in from other documents and from annotations in other areas. I would be a fool to continue my essay right now, unless I was running out of time, and not talk about slavery and what those circumstances were like. I would be crazy to move on right now, having talked about 1868 and not reference document 1 and the beginning of Reconstruction. So I would urge people to think about that as well too, right? You don't need to rush if you use your time well. And so this is a limited paragraph because it's only using information from one document. Being able to connect documents together makes it more analytical. So even though I'm going to have to pause here for today, and this is a pretty good example of a paragraph, this is also going to show the shortcomings of basing your paragraphs just on a document won't help you so much. You want to build your paragraphs using documents, but especially using analysis. Okay, I'm going to have to pause here for today. I hope this video was informative. Please let me know what questions you have. You can leave them in the comments. You could find me at Extra Help, and have a good rest of the day.